So, really what we're going to find out today is how blood travels through the heart, how it gets from the digestive organs. So disgusting, sorry. My hair. And then gets to the gills to be oxygenated and then is distributed to the rest of the body. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go from the lower half, the most posterior portion, along all of the veins up to the heart, through the gills, and then out through the arteries. So we're just going to follow like how a drop of blood would go through the shark circulation. Okay, so a couple things to note about the shark. First of all, it has a two-chambered heart. It has an atrium and a ventricle. The heart only carries deoxygenated blood. Okay, so its job is to be a muscular pump that pumps blood into the gills to be oxygenated. Okay, it has two big vessels, one that feeds blood into the heart and one that takes blood away from the heart. So when you have a vessel that brings blood toward the heart, that's called a vein, a venule, a venous area, I guess. And if you have a vessel that takes blood away from the heart, that's called an artery. So an artery, an aorta, an arteriole, all of those count as bringing blood away from the heart. Okay, so a couple things to remember is that as we're getting into the gills here, we see that, we know first of all that all of the gills are structuralized by this bony arch here. What's that called? There's a whole one right over here. Like, oh, there's my little fish skeleton. But this bony arch in the gill area. Yeah, gill arch. Okay, and remember they have all these little finger-like projections coming off of them. What are those called? They're gill rakers. And what they do is prevent big stuff that's coming into the shark's mouth from getting into these gill chambers and blocking the surface area for gas exchange. Okay, so each of these gill arches holds a set of gill filaments. And these gill filaments, they're bright pink because that's where a lot of the gas exchange takes place. So our arteries in this case are carrying oxygenated blood, and that's why they're pink. So not all arteries carry oxygenated blood. We'll see that in a second. Okay, so if we were to look into one of these gill chambers, we'd see that there's a wall of gill filaments on one side and a wall of gill filaments on the other side. Okay, so if we were to look at an entire gill chamber and see both walls on both sides, we would call that a holobranch. If we were looking at one side with one set of gill filaments, that would be called a hemibranch. So like if you were going to say, well, this shark, something got into its gills and it's blocking the gill filaments on, let's say, gill chamber, the posterior hemibranch of the second gill chamber has a blockage, okay? Or you can say that the entire gill chamber, the holobranch of the second gill chamber is blocked or something like that. So there's an anterior hemibranch and a posterior hemibranch, and the whole thing is called a holobranch, okay? So let's start from the posterior here. And we don't have too many veins to know because some of our sharks don't have very good injection. But yellow is referring to veins that are part of the hepatic portal system. The hepatic portal system is all the blood that's draining from the intestines up to be filtered in the liver and then brought to the heart. Okay, so if we look on the surface of the large intestine here, you can see this big yellow vein right here along the surface. That vein is called the intestinal vein. Okay, we'll see that this pink vessel that's accompanying it is the intestinal artery. In your book, it's called the anterior intestinal vein and anterior intestinal artery, but since we can't see the posteriors very well, we're just going to name this the intestinal artery and intestinal vein. Okay, so we see the intestinal vein then travels up to the spleen here. We're not going to know that. That's the lienomesenteric vein, but we're not going to know that. But what we want to see is here at the area of the duodenum, this yellow vein is emerging from the area where the pancreas is and all of these little mesenteries. Okay? So this yellow vein here is called the pancreatico-mesenteric vein. Pancreatico-mesenteric. Okay, it's coming from the pancreas and the mesentery. And joining in to this pancreatico-mesenteric vein are these yellow vessels that are coming from this big J-shaped organ. What's that J-shaped organ called?
The stomach.
The stomach, okay? So these are the gastric veins. They're joining in to the pancreatico-mesenteric vein. And once they join in and start traveling up to the liver, so like right about here, this is called the hepatic portal vein. Okay? So once the gastric veins join in with the pancreatico-mesenteric vein, then it's the hepatic portal vein. Okay? So the hepatic portal vein runs up through this mesentery. Okay, remember this mesentery connects the liver to the duodenum, or the small intestine. It's called the hepatoduodenal ligament. Okay, and if you guys have been noticing, a lot of our veins have with them a pink vessel too. So we'll know that there's an artery that's probably the same name. Okay, so that's good, right? All right, so up to the liver through the hepatic portal vein, and from the liver, blood then enters the heart. Okay, and to get to the heart, I wanted to cut through these muscles so that we could see the front of the heart. So the way that your book tells you to do it is through the back side, and I'll do that dissection on your guys' chart, okay? But I had to get to the ventral side of the heart, and I had to cut through these triangular muscles here. You guys remember what those are called? Coracoarcules. Yes, that's exactly what they're called. Okay, so I cut through the coracoarcules, and look, here's the heart. Okay, so it looks really simple. It's got this big chunky part here, which is the muscular pump, the ventricle, and then it looks like there are two chambers right behind it. See this black bag? It's actually one chamber, so I'm going to reflect the ventricle back, and we can see that it's just one big bag. Okay, it goes around the back. There's just one big bag. This is the atrium. Okay, so blood enters the atrium of the heart first and then goes into the ventricle. But to get from the liver, blood first travels into a big vessel, and it doesn't look like a vessel at all. So what I've done is I've reflected up both the ventricle and the atrium. And look I have this gray triangle. Can you guys see that? This gray triangle right here. Okay? So remember, I have both the atrium and ventricle up. Okay? And underneath is this gray triangle. It's really easy to cut, so you may cut it. But that gray triangle is actually a big vein. It's called the sinus venosus. Sinus means chamber. Venosus refers to vein, a vessel that's bringing blood to the heart. Okay? So from the hepatic portal vein into the liver, then up to the sinus venosus, blood then travels into the atrium of the heart and then into the ventricle of the heart. The ventricle then pumps blood up through this big gray vessel here. So you see that gray vessel? It's like a cone shape. It's bringing blood away from the heart, this right here. You can see there are little pink vessels along the lateral edges of that gray vessel. This vessel is called the conus arteriosus, okay? It's cone-shaped, it's an artery, it's bringing blood away from the heart, okay? So blood goes sinus venosus, atrium, ventricle, conus arteriosus. Okay, that's how blood travels through the heart. All right, so look at on the sides of this, or the lateral edges of our conus arteriosus, are these little pink vessels. Okay, so those little pink vessels, look, they extend onto the surface of the ventricle here. Those are called the coronary arteries. So they're bringing oxygenated blood to the heart itself, so coronary arteries. All right, so I don't know if this would be the LAD, the widowmaker. But yeah, I don't know if sharks have a widowmaker. Okay, so look. Now we have to get from the conus arteriosus to the gills, right? That's our goal. The conus arteriosus looks like it changes color here, right? Mm-hmm. It goes from gray to white. You see that, Bonnie? Okay. Sorry, guys. My big thumb's in the way. So this white vessel here that's running along the ventral portion of the shark is called the ventral aorta. Okay, ventral aorta, it's along the ventral side. And you can see here that the ventral aorta has these little vessels moving laterally towards, towards the gill chambers. Okay, there are branches on either side. Those vessels are called the afferent branchial arteries. Afferent means toward the gills. Efferent refers to away from the gills. Okay, so I know that they're not pronounced like that, but I always pronounce them like that so that you know that it's not afferent and efferent, because you can't tell with my Midwestern accent. So these are afferent branchial arteries. So from the heart, blood travels from the sinus venosus to the atrium, to the ventricle, to the conus arteriosus, to the ventral aorta, to the afferent branchial arteries. And then if I follow this one up here, I can see that it travels into this gill chamber. So you can see, look at that. Isn't that cool? You guys don't care. I think it's pretty awesome. All right, so from that afferent branchial artery, blood then is distributed into these gill filaments, and that's where it's oxygenated in the gill capillaries. Okay, so from these gill chambers, blood that's oxygenated has to flow out to the rest of the body. Okay, so if we take a look, what I did was I removed the skin from the roof of the mouth. Okay, I just peeled off the skin, and it's like magic underneath. A gross magic. Okay, so, and then I picked away some parts of the gill arches so that I could see the vessels as they flowed. All right, and what I found was that coming from all of these gill filaments running along the gill arches are these big pink vessels. And look, they flow from the gill arches and join together into one vessel here. Okay, so, and then if you look carefully, you can see these teeny little tributaries right here. Okay, these little tributaries right here. Get closer. All right, so what's happening there is that there may be several gill capillaries that are joining into a bigger vessel, and those tributaries there are called cross trunks. Okay, all the cross trunks then feed into these vessels here that are called the efferent branchial arteries. Okay, efferent, away from. So the efferents are going to be oxygenated. Now, blood then from the efferent branchial arteries joins together in this central dorsal vessel. This is called the dorsal aorta. Okay, so your ventral aorta is bringing blood to the gills, your dorsal aorta is taking blood away from the gills. Okay, now this is how blood gets to the digestive organs or the abdominal organs, but what about the brain? Blood, see these two little vessels on the lateral sides of our little vertebral column area here in the middle? There are two little pink vessels. It's purple on this side, but it's pink on that side. These are the paired dorsal aortas. So if blood's traveling to the brain, it goes on a pair of dorsal aortas. If blood's traveling to the abdominal area, it goes on a single dorsal aorta. Okay, so from now, we're going to look at how blood flows to these organs, because all of the arteries from now on are going to extend off the dorsal aorta from anterior to posterior. Okay, so to find the first branch, I'm going to move all of the digestive organs over to the shark's left side. And what I see here is this first branch of the dorsal aorta. This is the celiac artery. Okay, and if we follow the celiac artery, we see as it comes to, so here's my celiac artery right here. It has 3 branches. Okay, it's hard to see because it's in that hepatoduodenal ligament, right? It has a branch that goes here onto the surface of the stomach, a branch that goes down toward the pancreas and the mesentery, and a branch that goes up toward the liver. Okay, so you can see where it enters the hepatoduodenal ligament right here, but then there's a branch here, a branch up here, and then a branch down here. Okay, so this first branch to the stomach, on the surface of the stomach here, you can see those pink vessels. Those are the gastric arteries. What are the yellow ones called? Gastric veins. Yep. Okay, you can see that one branch turns up here towards the liver, and it's following along the hepatic portal vein. This is the hepatic artery. Okay, and then finally this last branch that goes down toward the pancreas and the mesentery down here and follows along with the pancreatico-mesenteric vein is the pancreatico-mesenteric artery. Okay, so your first branch, the celiac, has 3 branches: gastric artery, the hepatic artery, and the pancreatico-mesenteric artery. Okay, so now to find the others, we're going to push all of the digestive organs and mesentery off to the shark's right side and kind of extend them out here. And I can see that, look, there's one anterior branch of the dorsal aorta that's going up. It's crossing over and moving kind of posteriorly up to the intestine here. Okay, this is the anterior mesenteric artery, and once it hits the surface of the large intestine here, it becomes the intestinal artery. What's the yellow one called? Intestinal vein. Okay, so the more anterior of these 2 vessels here is your anterior mesenteric artery. The second one, if we see how it crosses over here, it goes up to the spleen. You can't see very well, but there are arteries that continue on to this lower portion of the stomach here. This is the gastrosplenic or gastrosplenic artery. Okay, so you have the celiac arteries, the first branch. The second, more posterior branch is the anterior mesenteric artery. The third one is the gastrosplenic artery. And then finally, the last branch is found in the anterior portion of the mesorectum. That's the mesentery connecting the rectal gland to the dorsal body wall. You can see this vessel right here. This is the posterior mesenteric artery. Okay, so from the intestines, blood travels into the intestinal vein here. It joins up into the pancreatico-mesenteric vein, which is joined by the gastric vein, flows into the liver via the hepatic portal vein. From the liver, blood then travels into the heart, into the sinus venosus first, okay, then into the atrium, the ventricle, flows up the conus arteriosus into the ventral aorta, into the afferent branchial arteries, into the gills and the gill filaments and gill capillaries to be oxygenated, then joins in to these little cross trunks which feed into the efferent branchial arteries, which either travel up to the head by the paired dorsal aorta or down to the abdominal area via the dorsal aorta, then into the celiac artery, which branches into the gastric, the hepatic, and the pancreatico-mesenteric arteries. Artery, pink. Okay, and then from the dorsal aorta, blood travels to the anterior mesenteric artery, this branch, the gastrosplenic artery, and then finally the posterior mesenteric artery. Okay? Awesome. Do you want me to show you how to, like, all you have to do for yours is cut into the tongue. So I go to the center, the very medial portion of the tongue, and there's some cartilage that forms the hard palate of the shark to cut through. And cut a little window, and what we can see here is okay, we can see the back of the heart. Here's the big atrium right here, and if I yank on the atrium, look at this, if I yank on this atrium, you can see this white, the white triangular part. Sorry, Bonnie.
That's okay.
It's like cartilage. I'm gonna ruin my sticky point there. All right, so I'm gonna pull on the atrium. See this? See the white part that comes up right there?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, that's the sinus venosus. All right, so from the sinus venosus, blood goes into the atrium here. The ventricles on the other side. What are those pink vessels called on the lateral sides of the conus that feed the heart? Those are the coronary arteries. Yep. Okay, so from your conus, blood then travels into the ventral aorta, which I kind of fucked up, and then into each of the gill chambers via these little vessels here off to the side, which are your afferent branchial arteries. Okay? Which is a pretty cool dissection.